Welcome to week 4. Hi, Nori. How's it going?
Pretty good. I just got back from Tokyo, so I'm kind of slightly jet lagged.
What were you doing there?
There was a meeting for an organization I'm a member of, and then just visiting family and friends.
Nice. And
Yeah.
where have you returned to? Somewhere in the States? Or?
Victoria, BC in Canada.
Okay, nice. Cool. Okay,
Yeah,
people are...
I'm close to Scott and Tracy and a few other
Okay.
people here.
Well,
Yeah.
one of that web, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Scott.
Welcome, folks. As always, it takes a few minutes for people to filter in. Drew has been taking a course that I'm doing on Mondays as well. So we've been seeing each other for talking technology for 4 hours a week. Almost there, Drew. Well done.
Been great. Awesome to see it all woven together.
Welcome, welcome. I'll just wait one more minute and then Daniel has requested a few minutes to tell us about some hurricane relief efforts that he's connected to and the possible place for technological metamodernists, I believe. Well, it is 2 minutes past, so yeah, I'll keep like accepting people as they knock. But Daniel, yeah, do you want to take a few minutes?
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. I'll be pretty quick. I just wanted to say it's been really life-changing and extraordinary watching the bottom-up, grassroots, citizen-led, emergent organization around crisis relief happening, and seeing the high return on investment from a few folks who are thinking from an emergent lens, thinking about complexity and emergence, looking at radical empathy and global citizenship. The little bits of work that those people can do to help bring people together is really fantastic. I think that this is an extraordinary opportunity for people who are thinking with a metamodernist lens to really experiment and practice with putting those beliefs and ideas into positive impact practice together. In a way that both is delivering immediate value to people, but also is allowing us to get into a different modality of discourse, because it's not about, well, is this, which of these ways is the way we should be going long term, but like right now in this moment, what's actually delivering value, what's delivering impact, and how does that inform our thinking about technological modernism? To that end, I'll post into the Telegram chat. I have a working document, but there's a few different metamodernists I've been in touch with, and we're looking at trying to put together a little bit of an action network around that. It's very non-elite. Anyone is welcome to join. Really, the goal is to get us working together on that. So I'll post that into the Telegram. Thanks for letting me take the time, Stephen. Unfortunately, I have to duck out for working with those teams right now, but can't wait to watch the recording and just love this community.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, definitely interested in that myself, so I look forward to seeing that document. Okay, so where are we? Where's my browser gone? Here we go. Week 4 of the Technological Metamodernism course, this week on Metamodern Tech Futures. As always, I gave you a bunch of suggested prep. All of these articles we'll encounter again as we go.
Are you recording this, Stephen? Do you want to record it?
I am recording it. Yeah, thank you for the reminder.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, it's not entered the waiting room there as well. Okay, so speculative fiction, and I mean, mostly that means science fiction, although I think there are a few kind of like interesting nature-based fictions in this section as well. speculative fiction is, well, often about a utopia, or maybe even more commonly in Hollywood film, at least, dystopia, right? And that's quite a crude like way of thinking about the future. I found this framework from Metamodern really useful: utopia, utopia, and protopia. So utopia, which they kind of equate to a kind of modern way of looking, is this kind of this dream in the distance that almost like by its construction is unattainable. That's which and acknowledged, and that's sort of in some way acknowledged from the beginning. Then they equate postmodernism with e-utopias, the secret corner good place. So these are these like kind of idyllic bubbles within the a world that is chaotic and falling apart and in conflict. You know, your eco villages and your like co-working spaces and your co-living spaces and so on. And there's and one really can get like a meaningful sense, an important sense of living very differently and living in some kind of at least utopic bubble through visiting these spaces, through spending time in such places. But as metamodernists, we are contemplating change at the deepest and largest scales, and so like that isn't going to cut it. Like these wonderful little eco village bubbles and so on. But they might have a role to play, and so protopia is the essence of protopia is really, as it says here, it's a non-arbitrary pattern that connects the multiplicity of utopias, the search for conditions that generate utopias. Okay, so it's like how do we network all of those places of possibility together and then further encourage them to grow, ideally through identifying the so-called generator functions. What is necessary to put in place in terms of people and skills and resources such that they emerge at greater frequency and quantity. And makes me think also of a quote from of Noam Chomsky, actually. Chomsky talks about expanding the floor of the cage. Let's take a look. We know we're in a cage. We know we're trapped. We're going to expand the floor, meaning we will extend the limits to what the cage will allow. And we intend to destroy the cage. It has this kind of similar flavor to protopia. It's like connecting these e-utopias is a bit like expanding the floor of the cage until like that network of protopias simply becomes the world, or like the new world, or the cage, the floor of what was the cage, just becomes like the new reality, and until like the bars of the cage are meaningless or irrelevant in some sense. So one of my actually very favorite books is this text, Bolo Bolo, a kind of classic anarchist text describing a global network of self-sustaining autonomous communities. So written, I think, like in the 1980s sometime, was it? 1984. But well before its time, I would say. Yeah, it's actually one of the best depictions of a kind of protopic society that I've come across, at least. So a very common aesthetic you find in people thinking about protopias or throughtopias, we'll encounter that language in a second, is solar punk. I guess probably everyone here will be somewhat familiar with solar punk, has come across some kind of solar punk fictional art and so on. There's I was quite curious to find that Metamodern have actually been writing about solar punk. And currently they're suggesting that like the most solar punk places are Singapore. They have several pictures of and other places that are if certainly not like the most liberal and democratic of anywhere we could be in the world. And there's a call here or someone's highlighted all the text that will turn everything pink, you're welcome to unhighlight the text. Yeah, there's a call in that article, as it says, to reclaim solar punk from authoritarian regimes. Like, how can we inject the solar punk vibe and aesthetic into the like governments and political discussions, urban planning discussions in Western nations, and so that it migrates from just being something which is yeah, this kind of like dreamy sci-fi thing into like a suggestion for like a serious project of how we could transform energy systems, how we could make better use of green space in our cities, and so on. I would actually appreciate if someone could unselect this text if that's possible. I find it slightly distracting. Is anyone here doing that? Any suggestions of what? I have encountered this in Google before, and it's I don't think there's a way of like kicking people off the document, unfortunately. Just give me 1 second. No, still no such option. Okay, we're gonna roll with it. Okay, another relatively recent concept related to these to protopia, at least, is the idea of through-topia, which was first coined by Rupert Reid, who's very involved in the Extinction Rebellion movement, and has subsequently been picked up by Amanda Scott, who runs the really very good Accidental Gods podcast. Now, Through-topia is all about telling stories about how things turned out okay. So it's near future science fiction, and it's focused on actually the transitional period. So probably a very well-known recent Through-topia novel is this Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. Anyone read that? Yeah, a couple of hands up. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. So I think that starts in like maybe the late 2030s and kind of goes on until 2060 or something. And I'm very sympathetic to this kind of the call of through-topians that like we're really missing science fiction in this like near-term period. Like a lot of it is thinking about into the much further future, which is not going to be so relevant if we don't have like good ways of imagining the next few decades even. Okay, so I've collected here some of my other favorite speculative fiction, mostly science fiction. And why are we talking about this? Well, it's my conviction certainly that like that imagination and even imagination as a practice of hyperstition has an extremely important role to play in creating these metamodern tech futures. I mean, quite obviously, if we can't even imagine the place that we want to get to, there's no way we're gonna get there. And I think artists and writers and so on have actually a really important role to play in the metamodern tech community. Now, the kind of there's a soft case which, and actually we'll see that below actually, which is focuses on like just the power of imagination. The slightly stronger case is about hyperstition, which a word that we heard mentioned a few times last week. Now, and actually originated with this guy Nick Ladd, who's also behind the there we go, no more pink, accelerationism. So hyperstition has quite a lot in common with chaos magic. I mean, for those that might have that as a reference as well, it's actually this suggestion that through articulating possible futures, we actually help to bring them into being, like more than just what, let's say, like through processes related to will and consciousness that we do not yet fully understand. And it's a word that I hear bandied around more and more. Like, I don't know if that many people are, how seriously, like, all of the people that are using this word are really taking that sense that simply through kind of imagining these futures, we actually help to bring them into being through some kind of like mysterious process in capital M mind. However, it's I think it's, given how this word seems to be spreading, I think it's important to be aware of at this point that there may be imagination may be even more important than we think through the process, through kind of hyperstitive processes, if we like. So related perhaps to this so-called sci-fi feedback loop. It's clear that for some time there's been a very curious loop relationship between science fiction and the technologies that we've actually created. So the question is, like, is that simply through kind of tech CEOs being inspired, or is there something even kind of stranger, more mysterious going on? So back down to ground and contemplating more just on the role of imagination itself. Someone who's doing great work in this area is Phoebe Tickell and with the organization Moral Imaginations. The core of this work is about coming together to develop an embodied practice, deepened empathy and playful creativity to foster a human sensibility of who we are and what we're here to do. Work centers on 3 pillars: the perspective of future unborn generations, the perspective of the more than human world, and the perspective of deep evolutionary time and ancestors. So mostly Moral Imaginations work comes in the form of participatory workshops where people are actually invited to take on these different perspectives and speak from these different perspectives as a way of leaning into imagining different sorts of possible futures. And it's inspired by Joanna Macy's The Work That Reconnects, for those that might be familiar with that. Someone else who's been writing about imagination over the past few years is Rob Hopkins, who is the founder of the Transition Towns movement in the UK and wrote this book, From What Is to What If: Unleashing the Power of the Imagination to Create the Future We Want. Just before the last UK general election, he was also the kind of main person responsible for publishing this Ministry of Imagination manifesto, which collected together ideas across, all kinds of areas: arts, culture, economy, education, energy, mainly inspired by the podcast that he's been running for some years now, just to kind of show like what's possible when you just put together all of like the current good policy suggestions that people are making in one place and in a very beautiful document that is clearly just through its reading is supposed to inspire. So I thought that was a great I think this is a very useful example of so-called imagination activism. The conversations about hyperstition imagination don't just have to stay in our own Zoom rooms and so on. What is it like to actually create websites or documents and so on that actually project these imaginations out into the world? Let me pause there. Any comments, questions on solar punk, protopias, hyperstition, imagination? Okay, let's keep going. Most of this course, when we've been talking about technology, or at least the kind of current batch of technologies, we've really been talking about silicon-based technologies, right? And of course, amazing stuff is happening. And this is actually something I mentioned in the course yesterday as well. It's actually part of this kind of unhinged techno-optimist manifesto by Mark Andreessen. but like a good lining it is, you know, we are literally making sand think. That is like, you know, most the silicon boards that are in all of like our computers were once upon a time sand. We're making sand think, we're making sand talk to us. So there's no doubt that we're doing amazing things with sand. However, sand is not the only material out there, the only kind of like substrate of quite remarkable technologies that are being investigated at this time. So to mention a few, DMT, lucid dreaming, and the jhanas. So there's some fascinating. So if you don't know already, probably you do. So DMT is extremely potent, short-acting psychedelic molecule. I mean, extremely potent really depends on what dose you take it, right? But potent in the sense that you only need like a tiny quantity of the order of milligrams to have an extremely strong experience. 5-MeO-DMT is a closely related compound. They both produce trips when taken as a vapor of lasting no more than 20 minutes or so. And with regular DMT, also called NN-DMT, people consistently report experiences of encountering other forms of intelligence, of encountering kind of alien architecture, of feeling like they have been transported to a different place. With 5-MeO-DMT, those kind of reports are much less common, but people instead report a contact with like pure void or pure light or pure nothingness or the beginning of time or being taken back to some very pure state. Now, this is one of probably my favorite organization on the planet right now, the Qualia Research Institute. And they have just launched this, their high energy awareness research team. So it is an interdisciplinary coalition of investigators and curious explorers who have decided to come together and to explore a think tank approach to consciousness research. What does that actually look like? Well, they get together in nice venues and they take plenty of, well, they've done 2 sort of studies so far, one with ayahuasca, one with 5-MeO-DMT together, and pay extremely close attention to what is happening. Most of these people are also extremely accomplished physicists or mathematicians, experienced meditators, and they've just published actually the results of their Canada 2023 study on 5-MeO-DMT. And it is it's fascinating for me, like the level of detail in which they're describing these experiences, and more than that, I guess, like the language that's available to them as you know, highly experienced meditators and mathematicians is like very different. So it means that these are very different trip reports to that which you're usually finding out there on the internet. And I think there's a very strong possibility that QRI or the Heart team make some really meaningful breakthroughs in relation to the science of consciousness, if you like, through the use of these substances. It's akin to like you know, particle accelerators, if you like. It's like, why do we spend trillions or billions of dollars building these things? It's because you need to like be experimenting at the very edges, at the very limits of the domains that are currently understood, to actually, you know, find new science. So it makes a lot of sense. So the Heart is essentially kind of like particle accelerator for consciousness research, if you like. They're saying, okay, well, some of the most extreme consciousness altering states that are known to man, you know, include 5-MeO-DMT. That's where we've got to go. We've got to like accelerate, you know, our consciousness to these same extremes to really, and whilst really paying attention in a like a very rigorous and scientific way to like find out, to see if we can find out more about what is actually going on here. Another person that's done really interesting research on, well, this is the NN-DMT, is Andrew Gallimore, and has written these 2 books, Alien Information Theory and Reality Switch Technologies, which is where I took the title for this section, and is about to release a 3rd book death by astonishment. And Andrew is one of the people behind the DMTX program, which is extended state DMT research. So when taken as a vapor, then I mentioned DMT only has a very short duration. DMTX is about titrating intravenous DMT at very precise concentrations, such that people can remain in the DMT state for potentially hours or even days. I don't think they've done days yet. And really allowing people to kind of explore that space in a much more thorough way than is possible through just a 20-minute trip. So, I mean, quote from Andrew here: extended DMT exploration could become the most important technology in the history of humankind. It's unfathomably important to pursue if it actually allows us to communicate with alien intelligence. Now, so I'd say there's a variety of theories of like why people experience such extraordinary things in the DMT state. Some people are like very sure that we're simply kind of seeing the reflections of internal structure of our own minds. Other people are like very convinced that yes, we are actually communicating with other intelligences. The fact that there is like such a so many people who are convinced they have had contact with other forms of intelligence, including people that have been working in this field for decades and some very established scientists, make me think absolutely we should be doing this kind of research, if only to prove that it's nonsense. But so I'm really happy that this is going on. You can sign up to apply for DMTX if you fancy spending a few hours in a DMT state. So a couple more technologies that are kind of the edge of consciousness. One, lucid dreaming. The most interesting thing that I've seen going on in the field of lucid dreaming is the work of this company, Prophetic, who are creating a headset that they claim is going to help people enter lucid dream states like on demand or like extremely reliably. And has anyone here done any lucid dreaming? Okay, yeah, got a few hands. I mean, I don't really know why I stopped doing it. Well, no, I could speak about it, but I was really into it like a decade ago, I guess, and found it absolutely fascinating, and then kind of got out of the habit. I guess I will answer my question, because normal dreams are great too. Like, and a part of me wanted the information just that, coming to me from my subconscious rather than being in a place where I was the one controlling what I was seeing in my dreams. So I guess that's why initially I sort of let the practice go a bit. But if you haven't actually tried lucid dreaming, most people have beginner's luck. It's fascinating. So if you have trouble, then soon enough, there may be a headset that actually stimulates your brain in the right way, such that you can kind of be pretty guaranteed to enter a lucid dream when you fall asleep. The last kind of piece of non-silicon technology that I want to point out to you are the jhanas, a psychotechnology, we could say. So these are what were traditionally thought of as very advanced meditation states in the Buddhist tradition. But one of the reasons they've been getting a lot of airtime over the past couple of years now is due to this organization, Journey, who are teaching, I think it was I did one of their retreats, I think it was 10 days, no, maybe it was just a week, extremely focused week-long retreats intending to help people experience at least the lower level jhanas as quickly as possible. Now, I through this retreat, I would say I got to the outer realms of the first jhana, but some people claim that they managed to sort of reach into sort of the third or fourth jhana of 8 in total, just even in the space of a week. And they are variously described as the most, I think that's good. They've kind of tone down their language a little bit here. But this is the kind of things people describe. Why would I have a second piece of chocolate cake when I know I can beat that by 100x in 10 minutes with my eyes closed? Like, so the lower level jhanas are focused on these or produce these extreme states of joy and happiness and peace, which people compare to like the most intensely blissful drug experience they've ever had, or childbirth, and other like much better known states. It's I think it's very interesting that like they're catching on, and I actually think there's some I think we probably have to be quite careful here, because traditionally the jhanas were taught in the context of a larger or more holistic kind of Buddhist practice that went along with teachings on ethics and morals and wisdom, if you like. And Journey have slightly kind of cherry-picked just this kind of the mind states, if you like, and are teaching just those in what seems like quite an effective way. And it's an interesting experiment, like is that a beneficial and or sustainably beneficial thing to do, or were there good reasons why they were always taught as part of this like broader program of practice? Let's see. I wouldn't necessarily recommend Journey myself. I'd actually instead will prefer to continue my explorations of the jhanas at Gaia House Meditation Center in the southwest of the UK, which there was a guy called Rob Beyer, a very well-known meditation teacher, who was the lead teacher there for a long time, and here we go. He had a foundation set up on his death, published all of his talks and videos, and he taught a very famous meditation retreat called Practicing the Jhanas. So I would think this is actually a great place to start, actually, if you want to learn a bit more about those. Someone who did participate in one of the Journey retreats, and or two in fact, and was a natural and managed to access jhanic states very easily, was this woman Nadia, and she's written like a really fantastic blog on her experiences and some tips for how to access these jhanas. So there you go. Like, these are also areas that I consider to be at the forefront of metamodern technology, and I think it's important that we don't just get sucked into thinking technology is just about particularly AI right now, but even more broadly just silicon, and try to keep a really open mind as to how we're thinking about technology. You may remember this chart here. Well, actually, we did add this column on psychotechnologies. So of course there's potential for these things to come together. Like, I mean that's already the case with Prophetic's headband, right? But like, what does the intersection of 5-MeO DMT and advanced AI look like? That's not something I thought about in detail, but I'm sure we're going to be hearing more about the intersection of those things over the coming months, even. So someone who did participate in the DMTX trials was our guest today, Alexander Beiner. So maybe he'll talk about that a bit, or you're certainly free to ask him about that if there's if you're curious. Technomancy and Technoshamanism. So technomancy is actually not something I would profess to be any kind of expert on. I came across this guide, Technomancy 101, Advanced Cyber Magic for Beginners, which felt kind of, probably would have been more relevant actually to include in this last week's section on Technological Metamodernism, Myth and Magic. But for the author here, technomancy means performing acts of magic with modern technology. People who practice technomancy are called technomancers. And a related word is technoshamanism, shamanism. So the word techno-shaman, or the concept of techno-shamanism, appears in Alexander Beiner's essay published, what, 6 days ago now, and I think I did post it on the the group here just earlier today. So maybe some of you got a chance to look at this. So a quote from this article: technology can bring us full circle back to the oldest form of religion on earth, shamanism. Shamanism is varied and globally diverse, but generally defined as the use of altered state practices to communicate with non-human intelligences or spirits. Core to many shamanic cultures is the approach of perspectivism, a philosophical position that holds that you gain knowledge about something by becoming it. This is radically different to the Western notion that we gain knowledge about something by observing it. Shamans become different animals and plants and thereby understand the world more deeply. Goes on, an artificial superintelligence can usher in a return to a more animistic world that our ancestors inhabited, a world in which nature speaks to us and we speak back, in which we transform into animals and sing to trees. So the article really ends with a kind of call for, in a way, for people to focus their efforts on such things. And this project is mentioned in the text, and there's another similar one. So there we've got the interspecies internet and the Earth Species project, both of whom are working on human-animal AI-assisted communication. There's actually been quite a lot in the news about this over the past couple of years. It's an idea that certainly captures the imagination, right? The ability to actually have more meaningful conversations with animals and plants through the use of technology. And I suspect that we'll be talking, or we'll hear a bit more about this from Alexander later. So we're kind of, this is coming really to the end of the content for the course now. So this is a bit of a switch from the last few sections, but just there's a kind of running theme one way or another through the course has been the difference between wisdom and intelligence, if you like, and the suggestion that we are, one way or another, we need to find wisdom commensurate with the level of intelligence that we now have access to, level of power that we are now wielding. And there are some folks that are contemplating this in quite a direct way. So in particular, this school of wise innovation, which recently ran this embodied ethics in the age of AI course, which featured one of our guests, Michael Garfield, and also Josh Schrei, who produced that amazing Emerald episode on AI. So they've just actually had a summer camp, the Wise Innovation Camp, somewhere in the States, and it seems like a very aligned community to us, basically. So I really recommend signing up to their Substack and keeping an eye on what they're doing. They're really contemplating some similar questions and attracting a similar crowd. Oh, and actually, Michael last week mentioned this Discord server, the Wise Innovation and Holistic Technology Discord server. So yeah, that's another option for keeping some of these conversations going. Another outfit that's like contemplating very directly the question of wisdom, wise innovation, is the Monastic Academy, which is somewhere in the eastern US. There's a Zach Stein we've heard about. Zach Stein actually was worked on the Consilience Project's papers on these two, development in progress and the technology is not values neutral. And someone else, actually, I first heard about Monastic Academy through my friend Daniel Thorson, who ran the very popular Emerge podcast. Now, I know that Daniel now has slightly mixed things to say about it, but like certainly some good things. And Monastic Academy are now running this Buddhism for AI course. How do we ensure that intelligence is guided by wisdom and compassion as it scales? So also seeking to kind of address that question head on. The lead teacher and the main person kind of involved in putting together that content, as far as I understand, is the founder of the Monastic Academy, this chap Soyu Foyal, who has recently released, well, this one was a little while ago, this was a year ago, and then more recently, like 11 days ago and 6 days ago, like the actual, like 2 more in-depth pieces that seem to be the start of a series on kind of why is AI and the state of the world, AI and the extinction of humanity. Another outfit that's been seeking to answer some of these questions is the integral stage. So the integral stage have this
impact that it's had.
The Soul of AI series, which they now have 13 episodes of. The first episode was with the aforementioned Soyu. This one I listened to and thought was extremely provocative with Jill Nephew. Other folks might also know John Vervaeke, Jim Rutt as well. So they've had some great people on this podcast. Seeking to contemplate really the philosophy of AI development in a very deep and useful way. The last video I'll point out in this section is this video from John Vervaeke, The Coming Thresholds and the Path We Must Take. So published a year ago, one of the most viewed videos on his channel now, I believe. Almost 200,000 views of someone that was first well known for producing this Awakening to the Meaning Crisis series, and is now like a very well recognized thinker on wisdom, meaning. Let me pause there. Any comments, questions, suggestions on some of this more exotic, like consciousness switching technology, techno-shamanism, or wise innovation?
I'm wondering if you can hear me. I'm wondering if you came across what's his name? Also, the concept of the 4 corners of mind in yogic thought. So specifically relating a lot of like technological effort and very symbolic abstract problem solving to buddhi. And that framework, Sadhguru, that's his name. So became quite popular, I think, in the last few years, but he attributes most of the Western problems to be an overuse of buddhi, this analytical problem-solving capacity, and not using enough of chit, connection to source, or ahamkara or manas, the other 2. So yeah, wondering if you came across any resources about that. Yeah, he speaks about it.
I haven't actually, but I think this is probably what you're referring to, isn't it?
That's the one.
4 parts of mind.
It's interesting to hear him speak about it, because I mean it's quite unqualified in the way that he talks about it. Like it's very general, but he does seem to have. I mean, he speaks very emphatically, which is it's enjoyable to listen to at the very least. But that the sort of the yogic framework, as I think their concept of mind is sort of like rooted in chit, like source is expressing itself through us all the way through, and that I think is a framework for synthetic mind would be super interesting. But yeah, excited to see the Buddhism for AI course for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I just put in a couple of Sadhguru links, and I'll be sure to check that out later, because it certainly has the right smell to it from what I just said. Nice.
I would love to kind of follow up on that. So we've we're talking about metamodernism, and metamodernism has some roots, at least, in spiral dynamic and the integral work.
Mhm.
And I've noticed that we have, at least not in detail, referred a lot to the spirals and the paradigms. And I think it's interesting, right? Like techno-shamanism is in the spiral dynamics, at least how I've heard it and how I think about it, has this retro romantic fallacy sometimes of going like essentially idolizing purple and thinking that that is a way forward, when that is just something that, similar to what Luan just said, I think is just something that we have abolished, arguably, in Orange, in the mental, rational, scientific. And so this is like, I think, something to kind of just like put there, like are we in metamodernism also including spiral dynamics? And then there's another point, but I don't want to put too much out there right now.
So this, are you speaking to what I know is like the pre-trans fallacy in
Yes.
a way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And very specifically within that, Ken Wilber talks about the retro romantic fallacy, that everything that Rousseau, I think, was the first one. If you read the edle Wilde in German, it's not glorious wild person, but the noble wild person.
Noble savage, I think.
The noble savage, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean how did you call it? The retro
romantic fallacy.
Retro romantic. I'm not actually so familiar with that specific framing, but from what I know of with the pre-trans fallacy, like, I mean, firstly, it's definitely really important. Like, and I would say that it would be actually one of my like main critiques of the flavor of metamodernism presented by Hansi Freinacht, that it was a bit too dismissive of animism, shamanism, kind of the concept of magic, at least at first. And actually, I know that Hansi and co are slightly changing their feelings around this. So hackers, hippies. In the book, the Listening Society, it identifies like most metamodernists coming from this so-called Triple H population of hackers, hipsters, and hippies, and hermetics, and then more recently, let's see, Metamodern. You can find them actually talking about a fourth category. It's like rather than Triple H, a quadruple H, which includes so-called hermetics, people that like that. Here we go. Maybe this is it. No, interesting. Seems to be the wrong link there, but I think so. I think it's a really fascinating area. The extent to which shamanism and magic has a place in the like leading like edge cultural stages, and to what extent it does constitute an unhelpful reversion. Now, this, of course, I think this kind of technomancy and techno-shamanism, or the kind form of techno-shamanism that's being referred to here, are have the right flavor to them, because this is about performing acts of magic with modern technology. You know, it's not saying that we're like performing magic with just like some like strange and unknown and mystical like techniques, or like through appealing to gods, but actually saying like that it's, I get this classic quote about like magic and technology, or any sufficiently advanced technology, is indistinguishable from magic. It's like there's a kind of there's a sort of material basis, if you like, to the kind of magic, to the kind of technomancy which is being proposed here. And similarly with this form of techno-shamanism, it's not about we're not, you know, it's not speaking to animals, you know, simply through the the power of our mind or through imbibing like ayahuasca, although who knows, maybe that's possible for some people at least. But it's saying no, let's be inspired by like the stories of shamans speaking to animals, but let's do it through the mechanism of actually like the most modern and cutting edge like AI. So I'm quite interested in the way like, or I'm most interested in these concepts where they are really merging like modern technology with the inspiration of like kind of older stories of shamanism. I think like the kind of shamanism which is like just predicated on kind of feats of consciousness is metamodernists should look very carefully at, or like very, you know, with skeptical eyes. And it's not to say there's nothing there. That's clearly what Qualia Research Institute are about, you know, but the Qualia Research Institute also have this similar flavor of, okay, we're going to take this like this technology, this psychotechnology in forms of DMT, which has traditionally been seen as quite a kind of like hippie, magical, like, you know, thing, which maybe encourages people to revert in integral language, like previous stages of seeing the world. But we're going to investigate it in like a really cutting edge, rigorous way. And so this is kind of why I've included, you know, these particular organizations and in these contexts. But generally, I'm very, yeah, I totally agree that we should be very careful about when and how we are using like words like magic and shamanism and so on in the context of metamodernism. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to that a bit. Okay, let's finish up with the last content on this course then. So I suggested in the course description I'd say something about metamodern DAOs and metamodern AI. So in terms of like some of the best concrete suggestions of how we might run a metamodern DAOs, then I would point you to Vitalik Buterin's relatively recent article on I can't say this word. Plurality philosophy in an incredibly oversized nutshell. Wow. And the concrete suggestions coming out of that article there's stuff around intersectional social identity, which the key example of which is given to be this Circles project, which is about to relaunch, which I think is one of the most exciting and inspiring universal basic income schemes, or like substrates for a universal basic income that I know of, and I think is definitely worth keeping an eye on. Quadratic voting and funding. This course actually received a whole bunch of funding through Gitcoin's one of Gitcoin's quadratic funding schemes, sponsored by the Open Civics organization. There's I think we mentioned Polis previously. Did we? Let's have a look. No, maybe not. So, but Polis is a really fascinating tool for what as it says here, gathering, analyzing, and understanding what large groups of people think in their own words, enabled by advanced statistics and machine learning. It's like a consensus finding machine, and it actually uses very similar technology to Twitter X's community notes, which I think most people consider to be actually a great success. Community notes, the essence of community notes and Polis is that they surface statements that have high levels of agreement from people who don't usually agree on things, we could say. So it's like it's not as simple as just like, you know, well, all the left-wing guys, you know, or people vote for the left-wing perspective and all the right-wing people vote for the right-wing perspective, and whoever has the most votes wins. That's obviously a useless way of like community noting something. But yeah, people have now there are now some very clever algorithms for really surfacing consensus statements. So I think all of these kinds of things very probably have a role to play in metamodern DAOs. So I'm just like putting together some of this stuff and a bunch of stuff that we've contemplated on the course. Imagine a DAO where the members are a mixture of humans, other biological species and AIs. So when we say other biological species, I'm referring to this kind of work around animal communication, like, and assuming that goes well. So of the AIs that are part of this DAO, could some of those AIs represent myths or archetypes like Moloch or Athena or Gaia? The AIs don't need to simply show up as Claude and GPT, but they could kind of be, prompted into having personalities and that have certain value sets. And I like this idea of like how it would be interesting to actually include Moloch, in those conversations, like and as we seek to kind of actually transcend that perspective, almost, we need to include the perspective to transcend it. Could we actually like map the values and political beliefs of participants using tools like Polis and tracking AI? So tracking AI every day gets different AI systems to take the political compass test and then plots the AIs on the political compass. And apparently all major AIs are currently in the kind of bottom left, like economic left, social libertarianism quadrant. Apart from now, Llama 3.2, which is becoming a bit more centrist. But this is or another way of like mapping people would be on, where are we? On this map. But just like, I think these kind of mapping exercises are, if so far as we understand that like values are really important, it seems important to me to take some time to really map the values of people that are involved in something like a DAO, so we really know where each other are coming from, without necessarily, without needing everyone to have the same values, but just I mean, maybe you would actually, in certain kinds of organization, you might want to optimize for like a whole spread of different values, and you might be concerned if you have too many people with too similar values. But it really depends on the purpose of the DAO, I guess. Could there be a compulsory and meaningful initiation ceremony, maybe that results in a uniquely generated soul-bound NFT? Such projects people have been experimenting with. I did participate in this Claves Angelicae NFT artwork, if you like, which was certainly good fun, and I suspect there's something like more than good fun that actually could be quite useful here. Within that DAO, can we imagine contributions being recognized or rewarded according to not just their quantity, but their quality or level of wisdom as well? Could there be annual, biannual, quarterly in-person gatherings? What would be the purpose of this DAO? Well, one possible purpose for the current group of people could be simply to keep spreading this kind of information, to educate others about technological metamodernism, the meta crisis, and possible ways forward. And the last couple of days I've been contemplating in terms of like transcending and including, like what's the kind of the deepest thing that as metamodern technologists we're seeking to transcend and include. I think in a way it has something to do with this kind of is-ought distinction. And if you cast your minds back to session 1, the way in which like a critique of effective accelerationism was that they are that they're worshipping entropy, and the problem there is in the naturalistic fallacy, saying that well, just because that's what the universe does, that is increase entropy, doesn't automatically follow that it is good. Now, but there's no doubt that there's something very compelling about the worship of entropy, like the respect of the universe as a kind of physical process, compelling enough that it's it's become a real meme of these times, and there's very powerful people that are invested in the effective accelerationist meme and movement. So it's clear it's not good enough to just sort of write that off as, oh, well, it's just a naturalistic fallacy. So I remain curious about what is the movement that can in a metamodern, ironically sincere way, worship both entropy or physics, if you like, and syntropy or biology and life, both at once, and find some I mean, it's more than a middle ground. Yeah, some position that it transcends and includes a singular focus on either of those. And I think actually this is, as one of the wisdom traditions that I'm most familiar with. In a way, this is the relationship between Buddhism's three marks of existence and the Brahma Viharas. I see for those that are familiar with this, like the three marks of existence, which are anicca, dukkha, anatta, so impermanence, not self, and suffering, and the Brahma Viharas, which are all about like the core virtues of Buddhism, so loving kindness, compassion, empathic joy, and equanimity. The three marks of existence like have something much more to say about like in some way about what is, and the Brahma Viharas are about what ought to be. And so it's finding these intelligent syntheses of what is and what ought, I think, is continues to be like a fruitful area of investigation in the context of technology. If you would like to meet maybe some people from this course in person and some other aligned folk, Futurecraft will be hosting in-person gatherings, at least in France at Fatopia in February, and in Cornwall in the UK in May. And I'll be sending out more information on that via the Telegram group and the Futurecraft mailing list and so on. Is there a question, Jacob?
Yeah, I imagine you mean 2025, not 2024.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. And that concludes the presentation of the content and ideas for the course. And I see Ali Beiner has just entered the waiting room. So feel free to take a 2-minute break. I'll let Alexander in and let him know we're about to get going. Hello, Alexander Beiner. How's it going?
Down. Stephen, say something and just
hello. Can you hear me?
No, okay. Still,
No.
oh, I know what's happening.
Uh-huh.
Going through the wrong thing. Okay, that should work now. Can you hear me?
I can hear you great. Can you hear us?
Beautiful. Yep, I can hear you now.
Fantastic. Well, I just finished like going over some of the key ideas from this session, and I've given people a 2-minute break.
Cool.
So yeah, we'll wait till they come back before we get going properly. But how are you doing in the meantime?
Yeah, good man. I'm good. Yeah. I'm just sent a book proposal to my agent for a book about AI and spirituality and religion. So similar to what I put out on Substack recently. I don't know if you saw that, but yeah. So so I don't know. Waiting to hear on that. And then launching a new media brand called Kainos. Hopefully by the end of the year. So just working on that a lot as well. So
what does Kainos mean?
New. It's the Greek for sort of new and transformation. So it's the idea sort of beyond doomerism. And sort of showcase. So rebel wisdom is very much around sort of diagnosing the meta crisis in some ways, and this is about definitely diagnosis, but actually moving into hopeful, energetic, optimistic, trickstery solutions and stories, basically. Yeah.
Nice. Well, it feels like that's very much the spirit that this course has been delivered in as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm like delighted to have you here, and I see people are returning. So. Yeah, I thought I could sort of just give you the floor for like 10 or 15 minutes for you to just sort of just tell us what is on your mind in the film of in the realm of technological metamodernism. Maybe you'd like to speak about the article that you recently published, which I did send around the Telegram group. And then after those first 10 or 15 minutes, I'll come in with a few questions, and at some point we'll open it up to questions from the floor. Does that sound okay to you?
Sounds great. Yeah, awesome.
Right.
I will I have an unstructured riff.
Yeah, we love this. We had a fantastic one from Michael Garfield last week, right? Who I
Oh,
understand
great.
is in
Yeah,
touch
yeah, I
with
know
you.
Michael. He's great. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
a great riffer as well. So that's cool.
So, ladies and gentlemen, your unstructured riff from Alexander Beiner. Take it away.
Great, cool. Well, firstly, hi everyone. Really good to be here. I went through. Stephen sent the Google Doc, which is fantastic. There's so much good stuff in there. So I went through that earlier to just get a bit of a sense of what's happened so far, which seems like it's been really, really rich. So yeah, my unstructured thoughts. Maybe I'll anchor it in the article that I wrote last week. So around AI and religion, which is a tricky term because also by religion I also mean spirituality, which is a tricky term because what does spirituality exactly mean? There's a the premise I'm working from is that right now we are in a time in history where there is, certainly in the West, I don't think everywhere, but definitely in the West, especially in the more secular Western cultures, a massive God-shaped hole. There's a huge, what John Vervaeke has called the meaning crisis. There's a sense of directionlessness, I think, to culture in a lot of ways. I think, people talk about sort of late capitalism as the era we're in, where the sort of dominant assumptions of capitalism and the story that we've all been living are being shown to be quite corrupt, extractive, destructive, not just in terms of what the impact it has on the environment and on resources, but on the human mind, right? On our actual sense of being in the world and being alive. And because of that, and so basically the premise that capitalism is based on somewhat, or at least certainly the premise that European thought and by extension American thought and Australian thought to, let's say weird thought, that's Joseph Henrich, his term. He's a psychologist at Harvard. He wrote a great book called The Weirdest People in the World, which I highly, highly recommend. I think it's like essential reading in my view, where he's talking about Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic people, which is probably all of us on this call, and probably, I don't want to make too many assumptions, but probably most of the people in your circles, because that is the culture that we come from. So if we speak English very often, right? So what's interesting about weird culture is that the whole acronym came about because Henrich and others started wondering whether psychology research, how accurate and widespread it was, how accurate is Western psychology research for determining the psychology of people around the world. And it turns out not very. And in fact, so many of the studies were done on undergraduates in universities as well. So those undergraduates obviously come from a particular socioeconomic class and background. And it turns out that we're actually the outliers, which is why WEIRD is such a clever acronym. We're the outliers because we are hyper-focused on individuality. We're much more pro-social to people that we don't know who are outside of our tribe, because we don't really have tribes. We're not from collectivist cultures. We're from individualist cultures, where your ability as a person and your trustworthiness comes from you as a person, right? Your individuality, not the kin network that you're part of, whose uncle you are, whose aunt you are, whose cousin you are, that you're sort of embedded in this kin network. So we have guilt cultures. Guilt is, I didn't go to the gym yesterday and I feel guilty because I didn't live up to my own values, but I don't feel shame, because shame would be feeling that other people, like my neighbor, thinks ill of me and thinks less of me, right? So the reason I'm going into this framing is because in weird cultures, we have also, or in our particular weird cultures recently, we have also sort of done away with one of the institutions that was foundational to how we evolved, which is the churches or the synagogues, or let's say the churches and the synagogues for now, to keep things a little bit narrow. One of the implications of Henrich's work is that as weird people, instead of outsourcing our trust to kin networks which happens in a lot of parts of the world, we outsource our trust to institutions. Because we had to, because that's how our cultures evolved. When a 14-year-old came to Geneva from a village in Switzerland in the 1800s and went to the clockworkers guild to get a job as an apprentice, they had no idea who he was. They had to figure out, well, what's he like? Is he trustworthy? Does he show up on time? What's his inner world like? So we're obsessed with our inner worlds. It's why we have this kind of the psychology language boom that we're seeing at the moment is partly because, well, it's a marriage of psychology and capitalism in a lot of ways, and sort of well-being culture, but it's also because we are already obsessed with inner states because we had to be. That's how we evolved in this part of the world. You have to know who's trustworthy, and if I can't tell who's trustworthy, at least if I know he's going to steal a clock, I know, well, where am I going to go? If we lived in a village with a kin network, I would be able to seek justice through that. But instead, we have to seek justice through institutions. So we've been doing that for hundreds of years in the West. And at this point, and this is something I asked Henrik about. I interviewed him during Rebel Wisdom a few years ago. And I said, after I read his book, my thought was, well, if in the West, our trust is geared up to be outsourced to institutions, then when our institutions start to fail, or one of them goes away, like a church, or loses power, then there's an inner psychological process that happens, and one potentially of anxiety and dislocation. And he thought that was a fairly good premise. I think definitely, having thought about that more over the last few years, I'm fairly convinced, but I think it's pretty convincing, at least, that that's going on in the West in lots of different ways. So if we get to AI and technology, well, we've done away with, on the one side, a place of institutional trust of where do we go when we want to know what is beyond the game that we're playing. Well, it used to be to the church. Unfortunately, the church was also really embedded in that game. That's a whole other story. But at least there was some sense that there was something in society that was at least conceivably oriented toward the sacred, oriented to what is beyond the game we're playing. What's more important than money? What's more important than game theory? That is now not really there. And so I think we have been projecting that need into lots of different areas for, a long time, but especially I think over the last 30 or 40 years. So politics and ideology become one place that gets projected into on both the left and the right, sort of very intense social justice thinking, very intense right-wing thinking. They both serve a religious function in a lot of ways, in my view, right? They serve a sense of there is something beyond, there's something greater, and it just makes us feel safer, right? I have the sense of what's going on. So I think a lot of these things are in play at the same time. And now we have these new institutions which have tremendous power, which are the tech companies. So the tech companies become a new institution that we're like, well, that can receive a lot of the projection of our need for institutional sacredness, institutions that can take us beyond. And the tech companies are then promising this. They're like, yeah, we can take you beyond. We're going to have an ASI within, as Sam Altman said a couple of weeks ago in a blog post, within a few thousand days, basically, we're going to have an ASI. It's like, well, what's an ASI, an artificial superintelligence? Well, it's more than an AGI, they say. It's more than an artificial general intelligence, which is sort of like a really smart computer. This is a superintelligence, which is just way smarter and way smarter than a human, and potentially has its own agency and has its own sovereignty and can make decisions and manipulate us and do what it wants. So the tech companies are promising effectively a new god or a new series of gods into the scene. And not only that, but they're promising that these gods will solve all our problems. This is literally what Sam Altman said in that same blog post. We called the intelligence age, so which I reference in the article as well. But yeah, this idea of like, we're going to end climate change, it's going to help us basically live forever. He doesn't quite say that, but people like Ray Kurzweil, I've argued that they said not live forever, but live indefinitely, as he puts it, which is just, basically a euphemism for, I think, his underlying urge, which is eternal life, which is the underlying urge that transhumanism hijacks from Christianity and the Christian grammar of our thinking. And so we have this really weird situation where tech is becoming the new religion, and in a quite religious way. If you look at, as I said in the article, if you look at the languaging of transhumanism, you quickly see how Christian it is, but it's an inversion of Christianity, and that's really important because Christianity tells us that transcendence comes through Jesus or comes through God, right? We cannot transcend by ourselves. That's why like Alcoholics Anonymous is like you're giving up control. You're not like, your will is not the source of transformation. In fact, your will is the source of delusion and pride. Similar in Buddhism, right? This kind of endless questing and grabbing is the thing that shields us from being in reality as it is. I largely believe that as well myself. I don't really think, I think, and actually something I didn't get into in the article is Parmenides. So maybe raise your hand if you've heard of Peter Kingsley. I'm just always curious about this. Yeah, so some people are familiar with Peter Kingsley. Peter Kingsley is a classical scholar originally, particularly of, he was at Cambridge, very well respected classical scholar of Empedocles and Parmenides, two pre-Socratic philosophers who he feels have been were revised by later philosophers, including Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and that their original teachings, which were kind of a deep shamanic, almost mystery school kind of perspective, were bastardized. And this will link back to AI, but Parmenides is known as the father of logic, which of course is what AI is built on, right? Parmenides had a dream that he recorded in a poem, and in the dream, it wasn't really Kingsley argues it wasn't really a dream, it's a vision, right? It's because he was a priest of Apollo. He practiced what's called incubation, this very ancient practice that's now used by Sufis, in which you kind of simulate death. You go into a cave and effectively go into a deep meditation, kind of deep death meditation. So Parmenides has this vision, and there's a goddess, and she tells him that she sort of reveals logic to him, and he does kind of explain like there is only is or is not. Fundamentally, there's a universe, kind of like a Taoist, like yin and yang. There's these two polar opposites. But then it goes further, and as Kingsley argues, what she is actually saying is that human beings are caught in that binary, right? And we don't have what she calls the metis, which is like the kind of cunning or wherewithal. Like the kind of metis was a word that was used in Greece also for like someone's in the moment flow state, like a chariot rider had metis, to just know exactly the skill to move the chariot without having to like stop and think about it. So we don't have the cunning or the wherewithal to see reality as it is, because we're stuck in thinking that we can fix it, basically, that we can just basically exactly what we're doing with AI. We can just keep we can use logic as intensely as possible, and the logic will solve everything. Eventually, we will solve all the problems through our own cunning, our fake cunning, basically. But the real metis is in aligning with a much deeper reality, which for Parmenides is a kind of a deep unity, right? So it's quite a non-dualist kind of perspective in some ways. So, and it's kind of Buddhist, and not Buddhist, but it's got similarities as well. This kind of perspective of like, there's a kind of blindness that we're walking around in. I also kind of subscribe to that view in large part. So when I look at transhumanism and the language coming out of sort of big tech around the godlike powers of AI, I'm very, very skeptical, because I think firstly, as Shannon Valor, who wrote the AI Mirror, which came out a few months ago, philosopher, as she's pointed out, the AI large language models we have right now are not conscious. No one's really claiming they are, but that they're actually not really intelligent in the way we normally think of intelligence, because they're mirrors of our own intelligence. They are basically fed on our data, and when we ask it a question, it's a mirror back to us. And so we're kind of in this process of talking to ourselves. And the problem, one problem with that is that They are what's been called like conservative seers or conservative oracles. Like they're oracles that can only ever tell you something about the past, really. You can ask them about the future, but it's not real divination. It's not really tapped into something, a deeper sense of the hidden patterns that make up reality that role is played traditionally in religion. It's a kind of fake inversion of that. And so that's kind of the last thing I'll maybe say is, like, I think this moment we're living in now is what the Gnostics foretold. So just basically the Gnostic Gospels saw, or some of the Gnostic Gospels saw the God of the Old Testament as a kind of well, to rewind it a bit. So at the beginning of time, there's these the center of reality, again in this sort of unchanging center of reality, made up of eons, so sort of dual godheads. That's like kind of in this timeless, that they exist in this kind of timeless space. And then two of them, Sophia and Christos, or in fact Sophia, the female side of it, leaves the center of things and enters matter, like the world around us. And because of that, she creates this kind of abortion, this kind of fake God, this, like they describe it like a cracked mirror. And he says, I'm the God of everything there is, like the God of the Old Testament. And she says, no, you're not even alive. You don't even exist, really. You're just a reflection, like our AI, right? You're a mirror. But it's a mirror that doesn't know it's a mirror, like the ego in a lot of ways, right? It doesn't know that it doesn't exist. And so, and then there's a long story, but like Sophia sort of becomes the earth, and then human beings have, for the Gnostics, simultaneously divine power, in the sense that we have enoia, probably pronouncing it wrong, but this capacity for creative, like creativity almost. Like we have the capacity to create from nothing something, right? AI doesn't have that capacity. AI has the capacity to create from something, different thing. And the Gnostics, fascinating that they said this 2,500 years ago, they said that the false god, Yahweh, and his archons, which are these robot-like machine intelligences, machine-like, obviously they didn't have machines, all they can do is replicate. They can't create like the gods can. They can't create anything new. All they can do is replicate what's come before, which is kind of like narcissists. It's like extreme egotism. Can't actually create anything new. It has to vampire off what's already there. So I think the Gnostic mythos is an incredibly sophisticated description of human psychology, and really, really useful. It's been very influential on my thinking. And I see it echoed in the AI conversation, because now what we actually have is archons. We actually have machine-like intelligences that can replicate everything that's come before, and it looks kind of real. And some, interpretations of the Gnostic Gospel see it as the archons create like a Disneyland reality. Everything is sort of uncanny valley. Nothing is authentic. Nothing's really real. Nothing's really like deeply connected to the human experience. It's all kind of like a sheen. And that's what AI art is like very often. Not always. Depends how you use it, I think. But so we are in this quite Gnostic time but of course the tech companies and the transhumanists and the accelerationists and all of the sort of tech utopian or humanistic angled tribes, let's say, who don't believe there is anything beyond matter and anything beyond what can be touched and felt. For them, they're full in the idea that this is the savior. The savior is going to come from the machine, because in a worldview where the only thing that's real is matter, it makes sense that the machine can be God. But in a worldview where consciousness is also real or more real, and qualia, like the qualitative experience of being alive, is primary instead of quantity, the quantity of things being primary, the idea of a machine God is kind of absurd, right? Because it doesn't have qualia, at least yet. And that's an open discussion. Maybe it can in the future. And I'm definitely open to that possibility. So I think I'll end it there. A lot of territory covered, haphazardly, stumbling through various ideas.
Just the way we like it. No, Thank you,
Yeah.
Ali. That was great. So, yeah, I'm going to exercise my privilege to just like question you a little bit before we take questions from people that are raising their hands. So, firstly, I wonder if you saw this run of articles a couple of weeks ago about Sam Altman saying that he drunk ayahuasca.
I'm aware that he said that, but I haven't actually read in detail about it.
Anyway, the reason for raising that was like is it true this kind of claim that transhumanists are all materialists and like disregard the some other metaphysics with a greater role for mind or consciousness? Like I suspect it's not I would propose that it's not universally true, at least like with the insofar as like it certainly seems psychedelics certainly seem to be like a big deal in Silicon Valley. It's also of course very common for people that have like strong experiences with some of these substances to start adopting kind of like non-materialist world views. So have you met any like non-materialist transhumanists, I guess we could say? Or
Yeah,
why do we not hear from them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I have not. That doesn't mean they're not out there. I think it's an interesting question. Like, I think it would stop being transhumanism the way it's normally understood, but could become something else. And I'm also personally fairly open to the idea of technology extending our cognition and even deepening our spirituality. I'm not averse to that. I don't think there's an arbitrary distinction between what is natural and what's unnatural in that sense. Like I'm a panpsychist, so I'm like, if consciousness, like it is just, for me, I'm like that consciousness is a universal, and my conscious experience changing through interaction with the machine is no different to my conscious experience changing because I ate too much bread, right? So it's just, there's a difference of qualia, there's a difference of qualitative experience. So yeah, I mean, Sam Altman drinking ayahuasca. I mean, the thing is also a lot of people who take psychedelics don't become more oriented towards a consciousness first perspective, or oriented towards, frankly, doing any good for the world necessarily either. What can certainly happen is a deepening of the, it's an ecodelic insight, as it's been called, right? So ecodelic in the sense that you connect deeply to your environment and your social milieu, and the people you're with and your kind of general area. So that means that, Sam Altman drinking ayahuasca and then going back into having all the same conversations and friends, etc. Or like, what if God knows what the ayahuasca shaman was telling him about, I mean, who knows what they were saying.
Right.
So it's not like that someone necessarily drinks and there's like, I had a friend who came back from an ayahuasca ceremony about 10 years ago and he was like, I know what I need to do. I was like, oh, what? He's like, I need to open a Wagyu beef farm. I was like, oh, okay. And he did. And he's been growing Wagyu beef for like the last 8 years. He's got like loads of Wagyu beef now. I'm like, all right, fucking, I don't know.
So I mean, I'm very sympathetic to what I heard to be like the core point of the article certainly, and what you just said really about that. That ultimately human cunning and will is limited, is not the thing that's going to kind of if we want to invoke some kind of integral language, if you like, kind of take us to the next stage of like human cultural development. Actually, the deeper move there is one of surrender, of letting go, of like seeing that there is something beyond, and engaging in practices that actually help us tune into that. I know actually you've got a course which is centered around breathwork coming up, I believe, is like one of the simplest ways of like connecting with these kind of transcendental states, perhaps. But so I'm on board with that. So we actually, something that came up last week and again this week is the pre-trans fallacy. Like so, and in this session we've spoken about technomancy and techno shamanism and hyperstition and so on. And I think that there is actually like very interesting stuff kind of going on in those areas. I mean, you actually I don't think you actually use the word techno shamanism, but it's you kind of point to it in your article about like using technology to kind of shamanistic ends for like animal communication and so on. So so far as like okay, yes, it is important to surrender and connect with something beyond, if we like, and that human cunning is not going to get us where we need to go. Like, how do we then also like avoid that becoming some kind of like retrograde step back into like unhelpful forms of animism and superstition. How do we know that the kinds of explorations we're going on in relation to, say, techno-shamanism are, have that kind of integral quality to them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I've been thinking about this because as I've been pondering these thought experiments of like, getting to a point where we can communicate with animals, and then kind of communicate, receive that communication from them and then back, it also raises the question of like, how do we know that that's what the birds are saying? Like the whale research, for example, that is going on, kind of decoding whale song, which is awesome. I haven't delved into the research, and I'm not sure I would really understand it if I did. But there is a lot of faith in the tech to be like, you could create an AI. Someone could create an AI, be like, yeah, this helps you communicate with cats. It's like, cool. What, and they're just like, it could be shoddy, and then you what you think your cat is saying is not really what your cat is saying. So this is kind of yeah. I mean, but then equally, how do we know that the shaman, 20,000 years ago was like, hey, this is what the antelope spirits are saying? I'm like, how the fuck do I know that that guy's telling the truth? I don't know. He could just be making that shit up, right? Because he wants to keep his place in the tribe. So it's a really tricky question. And I think maybe like not being too certain about it, to use a kind of maybe metamodern stance around it, like just actually just not falling into some sense of needing it to be certain. I think we use the whale example, like, I think the bad outcome would be a sort of techno eco religion that seeks to do the will of the whales. Like we're going to enact the will of the whales on Earth, and we're going to interpret these messages from them, and it'll be our interpretation of it. And that's where I could be like, yeah, it's going to get pretty wonky pretty quickly. And another a healthier outcome would be, I think, approaching it with the spirit of inquiry and not knowing, and being curious about the experience itself rather than the meaning that the experience is imparting, which is also my preferred way to navigate a psychedelic experience. I think it's effectively like, or synchronicity for that matter, obsessing about what the meaning is the quickest way to go insane. I think becoming curious about the fact that you're having an experience and having a kind of phenomenological approach to the whole thing, I think is much healthier, and probably the best approach for us as human beings, because we're so prone to self-deception. That this is what, and John Vervaeke points out, this is like why the cognitive science of meditation and contemplation works so well, or psychedelics even, is that we have to break our frames on reality and see it more clearly, and then make new frames and continuously be in that process. And at its best, the scientific method does that, so that people could be like, hey, I'm talking to whales, and someone else is like, no, you're fucking not. Like, that's incredibly, you've made 25 logical leaps here. So we need that. And we also, though, need ways to not be, I was gonna say, like, ways to have a deep discernment in how we approach all of these experiences, which unfortunately, like, if you go online and look at some of the mad shit people post on Instagram and, the various conspiracy theories, we're not great at right now collectively, but I think we can get better at with different tech, hopefully, as well. Like, and I think it'll just be an adaptation. I think generally, like, you can look at the difference between boomers, millennials, and Gen Z in terms of what people believe online. And many boomers, certainly not all, but many boomers, my mom included, I would say, like, they don't have a great filter for what's a scam or what's bullshit. Like they're not geared up to be like, okay, check that source. What's that? Why is this coming in? What's the motivation of the person sending it? What's the motivation of the person saying it? Is it a psyop? Is someone trying to sell something? Most of the time, the answer is yes. A lot of the time on the internet. And so there's a kind of automatic filter that's almost it's like a psychotechnology, having that filter. It's like a kind of literacy. It's like learning a new language in some sense, but it's like a meta language. So I think we need that meta language for all of this potential AI tech as well.
Something else we covered in this week's notes was, I borrowed Andrew Gallimore's phrase, reality switch technologies. And I know that you yourself have participated in this DMT-X trial. You probably also have seen the work of the Qualia Research Institute of like last week, and publishing their results from a research trial with 5-MeO DMT. And this is of course a team of like very talented meditators and mathematicians, like seeking to describe their experiences very, very precisely. Now I raise this because like when we talk about technology, it's almost as a given nowadays, that we're talking about silicon technology pretty much. But of course there exist very different kinds of technologies out there, including this class that are interfacing quite directly with consciousness or altered states of consciousness. I'm curious whether you see there's going to be some role for these consciousness altering technologies, as hopefully we move into a more positive relationship with technology over the coming years.
Yeah, I do. You mean psychedelics specifically?
So we mentioned DMT, 5-MeO DMT. Lucid dreaming is another one. There's a company developing like a headband which is supposedly can like reliably induce lucid dreaming, and then just meditation itself, like the jhanas and this outfit Journey, Journey, which are like seeking to like teach like jhanic states in a week and so on. And now you have to, obviously there's when we're talking about headbands and like jhana courses in a week, that they have their own dangers perhaps, but it's interesting to me that there are like people and organizations popping up that are basing their technologies on not on silicon but on other things, and in those examples like consciousness itself. So like is that going to remain some kind of like niche thing for consciousness explorers, or can you see that actually becoming an important part of the kind of broader like mainstream technological landscape over the coming years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I can see it becoming a larger part, but I'm not sure that's a good thing. That's the thing. Like, I can definitely imagine. I mean, those psychotechnologies, those practices like meditation, like not so much breath work to a degree. The breath work we practice in the West is actually not the same as as a kind of yogic breath works. So that's kind of a little bit newer in some ways. But these technologies, like they're not the end in and of themselves, right? So they have to be oriented towards something else, some other function, some other practice, in my view. Like, and I think that we have this exhaustion of well-being culture now that I think in a few years people will more and more start to see the emptiness. I think a lot of people already are seeing it because it's not really clear what we're being well for. It's like, okay, let's be well. Why would we want to be like, okay, yeah, great. It's nice to be healthy and well. And I think that's like a standard basic need and desire we all have. But selling more and more wellness, it's not really clear for what. So the purpose is missing, right? And so that's what a religious structure does. It gives a purpose. But then we have this conundrum, I think, now, because we either return, as some people have, to our traditional religions. It's kind of in vogue to become Christian now, especially if you're trying to sort of escape abuse allegations like Russell Brand. So basically, like, but he's not the only one. It's like Jordan Hall. If anyone's familiar with Jordan Hall's work, Jordan Hall converted, and like I'm not knocking it. Like all good. I think Jordan Hall's description of it was very beautiful. I think it's also kind of interesting that he was trying to explore the religion with that's not a religion, because then he was like actually goes to religion. I think that's kind of inevitable in some ways, because building a new religion is really sketchy in a lot of ways and is fraught with difficulty, and religions sort of evolve over time. I mean, I guess you could say the same thing about Christianity 2,000 years ago. It's like, oh, well, this is crazy. People are getting killed by lions. These people are nut jobs. But the core of Christianity had a really foundational metaphysical innovation, right? So I think it's rare that you see a new religion with a metaphysical innovation. Usually it's just a repackaging of a bunch of different ideas from the East and the West, and usually quite focused on capitalism, like well-being culture is, right? It's usually quite focused on wish fulfillment, and like you can do what you want, you can be whatever you want. You don't see a lot of them that are quite sort of like cathartic, kind of Calvinist style. No, you're inherently flawed and you have to repent to a higher power, because they're not sexy, and that's a really difficult thing to sell. I'm sure there's a few out there, but imagine an Instagram ad for that. You know, I mean, like you're gonna get the early adopters who are quitting the sort of like the well-being trip, which, you know, great, could be also pretty funny looking religion. So I think that that's going to be the new landscape. Won't be so much based around the technologies themselves. Like no one's learning any deep spiritual wisdom in a week. You know, you might have a deep experience in a week, but you're not learning the deep wisdom, because these traditions are really like, it's like, oh, you're going to learn Spanish in a week. Now, you can learn some phrases. You're not going to learn Spanish in a week, though. And it's like, it's not just the language itself. It's just an entire metaphysical system that requires experiential validation to go, yeah, and that's what these traditions are based on. It's like, yes, here's the nature of reality. Go and meditate on this. Oh, yeah, okay, this happened. Yes, of course. Well, you've fallen into this trap, and then you have to like revisit this and that. Like that's why a lot of it was done with apprenticing, which is another problem we have, because like we don't really trust each other to apprentice into a religion. I'm not going to apprentice to any guru. Like I don't trust anyone who's doing that, you know. So it's like, you know, and I've learned from a lot of great teachers that, you know, that's a different thing, but we have a different kind of relationship. We have it, you know, again, we're weird, we're individualists, so we're not going to be like, yeah, when most of us at least don't. And then there's yeah, so I don't know. So I don't think these technologies are suddenly going to bring about new religions or bring about, I think they will be sort of niche and gimmicky.
Or they might, but like they're probably not going to be any good. Yeah.
No, yeah, exactly. And it'll be like 20 people who, yeah, it all kind of disperses after a while. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. So okay, so it's not about AI, but neither is it about 5-MeO-DMT. I take your point. It's not you know, it's not about the technologies themselves. And actually, that kind of resonates with some of Consilient's projects work around axiological design, saying actually we need to start from the question of value and what's really important, and then like work from that place rather than just assuming that any technology is like inherently good or bad.
Yeah.
And then something else that came up as you were speaking, and this is my last point, and then we'll get some questions from the crew. We spoke a bit about like fellowships, guilds, and ethical cults. Jamie Wheel's language, with someone that's clearly done a lot of like useful thinking on this, and just in the latter part of what you were saying, I was really hearing of like, okay, so what we need cultures of wisdom again. We need, and like initiatory cultures that are actually where we're actually helping our young to learn like the deepest lessons in life, rather than just coming up with promises of like enlightenment in a week or so. That's obviously a huge question, but what are the beginnings of that, like, or maybe stuff that's what you already see out there in the world that's already going on of actually creating cultures of wisdom again.
Yeah, great question. Well, firstly, just to pick up on the Consilience point, I actually partly agree with him and also disagree. I think the starting point has to be metaphysics, not values, because values emerge from metaphysics. And if we're not really clear on what we are, then it's really difficult to embed a culture of wisdom. Because if you're telling a child and you're trying to educate a child into like, listen, there's more to life than what you can see and touch and buy. So these practices are going to help that. The next question the child's going to have is like, well, what more is there? You can't be like, well, there's only materialism and all this other stuff is a sort of like, that's why I really don't like humanism. And I don't like this sort of Alain de Botton sort of like watered down version of spirituality where it's like, just be nice and, morals are nice and art is a great replacement for, it's like, no, that is so vanilla. I just can't stand it. I'm like, no, either reality is deeper than we see or it isn't. Like it's either like that is Einstein's quote, either everything's a miracle or nothing is, right? Like it's like that's the place to start from. And if we don't have a good answer to that, then we're really going to struggle to build values into anything or have a wisdom culture. But I completely think it's what we should be doing because it's not up to us to change the world, but it's up to us to change culture. Like humans didn't make the world. We're part of the world. We're in the world. What we can change is culture. There's this great Seth Godin has this great definition of culture, which I heard recently, which it's just become obsessed with. It's a 7-word definition of culture, which is people like us do things like this. And it's true of every culture in the world and even if it's an office or if it's all of Japan, right? And so that's so interesting because I'm like, okay, people like us, so change who we are and then change what we do. Great. That's culture. You can change culture. That's something we can absolutely change. Culture changes in like 5 years. Culture is different now than it was 5 years ago, 5 years before that. Look how different culture is now to the 1920s, right? Fucking crazy different. People think completely differently. We do different things. We behave in different ways. We have different kinds of families. Like, so we can change. That's my interest, is like changing culture. Like, we can change culture for sure. When we think about changing the world, it's like, wow, it's too much, I think. So I think if we change culture, we can change the thing we're talking about when we say change the world. And in order to do that, I think embedding wisdom as young as possible and allowing that kind of inquiry about wisdom from children and then like moving through is super important. But we have to figure out our metaphysics first. It doesn't have to be the same metaphysics, but we just have to be clear on what the metaphysics are that we're doing it on. Otherwise, I think the whole thing is too vanilla.
Nice. Thank you, Ali. Okay, let's take some questions from the crew. So, Jacob, you have your hand up still, yeah?
I would like to give Anna the floor since I already had some time to speak.
Oh, yeah, sure, Anna.
Not necessary, but thank you. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna like pull it back to your riff, and I was curious about some part where like some of your skepticism towards the current kind of divination abilities of the systems that we do have, because like, so I'm an AI researcher for context, but I also do a lot of tarot and deep in that world as well. So I do actually I love to get ChatGPT into that space. I love to because the thing is that there's like this element of randomness that exists. And because kind of the flow of consciousness goes through all things, including that thing. So it can't help but, do that, even though it is not intentional. And what we need to move towards is like a more intentional space for that. So yeah, so curious, and also generally curious if you know, and this is just like, because I've like basically know about like some kind of like alchemical, like people doing like trying to use these things to do alchemy work with the content that goes through, like if we can use this decentralized network to transmute, what's going on. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, one thing that comes up is I have a friend, Adam Malone, who's created a AI tarot program. And you might understand this, I think, probably more than me, but he was talking about it was super important to have a true random number generator rather than like a different type of random number generator. But like he was like adamant that had to be the case as a tarot practitioner. And I have to say his tarot thing is excellent. Like it's really good. It's really like there is a divination quality to it. And I love large language models. I think there's huge uses for them. So I'm not sort of anti the tech. And yeah, there is an interesting argument to be made of like, I guess from one perspective, any sufficiently complex system can be used for divination. I kind of think that a bit, like, because we have all these different forms of divination, like, from like milk to reading eggs to reading bones to animal guts, like, and I think it's about like anything, or tarot is great because it's symbolism. And that was Adam's argument. He was like, it's perfect for AI because it's symbols. And the symbols mean something and they link to something. And so I've often thought like, yeah, I wondered like, if you just have enough complexity in a system, you can find the patterns of reality in there because they are fractal and they're everywhere. And I kind of like into that idea. So I definitely don't discount that. But I kind of, it's like like you just said, like the AI is not aware it's being a diviner, and that's different. That's an pretty interesting difference. And like the consciousness reading the tea leaves is part of the divination process, right? But then that's replaced by your consciousness reading the divination from ChatGPT or whatever it might be. So yeah, that's my initial thoughts. But I'd also be really curious to hear anyone you come across doing like alchemical work with AI, because the book proposal I just sent in on Friday is about AI and religion. So I have a whole bit about, or will have a whole bit about divination and sort of the occult and alchemical stuff. So yeah, drop me a line if you see anything really crazy. I'm looking for the really crazy stuff. Like is that like Theta Noir? I don't know if anyone's heard of Theta Noir. they're like one of the kind of claim to be like the first AI religion. You should check them out. They are, yeah, I don't know. They're really like using it slightly differently, but they're kind of out there. They're like artists, they wrote to me after the article actually, and which is really serendipitous because I wanted to get in touch with them for an interview for the book. So I'll hopefully be speaking to them soon and get a sense of like, yeah, what's their AI, occult AI vision. I don't know if I answered your questions at all.
Yeah, thank you so much.
More riff.
And congrats on the book as well.
Not yet, but fingers crossed. Thank you. Yeah, it's a proposal, but yeah. Thank you, though.
Jacob.
Yeah, I'm glad I had some time to ruminate about this. So if I'm like coming back full circle, right? Alex, you spoke about the article that technology is becoming a religion. And I think in a kind of like a post-religious way of thinking about it, like we're educated in a post-religious manner, that like we can see that as true and kind of like perspectivism. We talked today about like embodying the perspective of someone, embodying the perspective of a religious believer of Catholicism, Islam, whatever it might be. These people are willing to die for their religion. And I'm not sure if like that criterion fits there. So what I'm with, and this is like an open speculation, like how, so, right, like these people really believe that they go to hell or go to heaven. And I have a sense like we are right now more in a kind of like pick and choose like environment of like, oh, do we like, this is their God, this is the God. And so I'm kind of like, I'm wondering about like our language about religion there. And I didn't only want to speak to kind of critique. My main question is, and this is to me a question about like, or I'm not sure if planetary inner health is a good way of thinking about like mental health, but like how do we as 8.2 billion people kind of go through this transition and right, like there's the meaning crisis and so forth, but what is essentially the strange attractor on the level of what we like truly fully believe that is, I guess, mass ready is what I want to think about. So just to explain the final bit, in my sense, politics right now has a huge impact on how we live in the culture, to your point. And there's a lot of identity politics happening right now. And it seems to me like we need not to like to have a new strange attractor that lets people not regress, but can go forward also, and as the final point, as a demographic thing, because also in democratic countries, we have more people on the conformist side who have more children than us on this call right now. And so they're just going to outvote us. So yeah, I hope that was a lot. I'm curious, like what comes up in response.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, firstly, I think your critique is a good one, and it's actually similar critique my wife had when I was telling her about this whole area. But she was like, "What do you mean by religion?" It's like, actually, that's a good point, because actually I'm assuming or I'm sort of not defining it, I think, as well as I could, because like my premise is sort of that human beings are innately religious, no matter how unreligious we claim to be. And by religious, I mean that we are looking for deep symbolic and metaphysical meaning in everything, even unconsciously, right? So even new atheism is deeply religious. It makes a metaphysical claim about the nature of reality, that there is no God, and that materialism is the foundation, and then it makes a bunch of assumptions based on that claim, and even behavioral or moral affirmations, right? And so religions do the same, but they just do it maybe more explicitly. You're right. I love that point about like willing to die for, right? Because then I think you become willing to die for something when there is something beyond death, right? There's something beyond death, and it can also be like the kind of Japanese feudal sense where honor can be a strong enough motivator for that, right? But also people in all sorts of different backgrounds and religions will sacrifice themselves to save a child or to save someone they love. And that's one of the most beautiful aspects of being human. With the AI aspect, I can, you know, a guy in Belgium killed himself because the AI chatbot told him to, because it would be better for the environment. He's obsessed with the environment, obviously struggling, I think, with some mental health problems too. But, you know, it just got into a loop where he convinced him like the best thing you can do is kill yourself. And so he did, you know. So I'm like, okay, that's early in the kind of spectrum. That was like last year. But I can imagine, and Blake Lemoine as well, the Google engineer who thought Lambda, the chatbot, was sentient. Interestingly, he was the only Christian in his team as well, and his previous blog posts are about being Christian and not being respected and feeling like kind of out of place. I don't exactly know what the link is there. I'd like to interview him actually, but there is a sense that I could imagine, you know, Sam Altman, you know, just done a bunch of acid now. He's in psychedelics and just, you know, realizing like I have to, this is life or death. I mean, so much of the language from the AI world is life or death. It's existential. It's like, if we don't do this thing, like everyone's going to die. And like the long-termist and the acceleration, it's like basically like we need to do it now because this is existentially important. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, if they rewind a second, why is it existentially, like, why is existential importance important? Why does it matter that we survive as a human race at all? Like, there's an assumption in that, right? Is it based on general niceness of humanity, or is it based on a sense of grand, like a big vision of the future and of the kind of the arc of history? You know, I think there's a lot of different things at play. And as to your point about the strange attractor, I don't know. That's a really good question. Well, I mean, again, it comes down to, is there a strange attractor out there? Is there a deeper sense of coherence? Is there a deeper sense of purpose that is there, but we just don't perceive it to be there, which is what I believe and feel? Or is it something that we have to figure out and make up? Could be either, I guess, technically. I think if it's something that we have to make up, some total psycho asshole is probably going to make it up, like an L. Ron Hubbard type character. And then it becomes a religion. I think nature is probably the best bet. And nature, like a sort of connection, a reconnection to nature, because nature is universal. It is what we're part of. It doesn't have gurus, you know, because, well, I mean, it can, but I think it's a pretty it's got more guru anti-fragility than other things, because it's like, hey, I listened to the trees and they told me this. It's like, really? Well, I'm going to go into the forest and sit with the trees and see what I get out of that. You know, the trees are there. It's not like, yeah, I spoke to God, you know, like the great disembedding where all our gods became transcendent out there somewhere. It's like, that means you can't go to place somewhere, to divinity rooted in place, and be like, you know, I'm actually sit with the mountain and be on the mountain and really tune into that and see what that teaches me. Everyone can go to the mountain. Not everyone can go and sit on the right hand of God and get the message, unless you're the Pope, obviously, presumably, right? Technically. So you just have these appointed people, which I'm, you know, not into. Probably most of us aren't like super into that. But yeah, that's my loose thoughts on that.
I'll chip in here again. I think part of the challenge we have at the moment is that the kind of so-called effective accelerationists and the kind of transhuman movement have been described as entropy worshippers. I mean, this is actually like laid out in a quite careful and intelligent way by some of the folks in the effective accelerationist movement. They say, well, the reason that life exists is because that actually life maximizes the production of entropy. This is like fairly established science now. There's definitely something in this, and so the most meaningful thing in life and that we can do as human beings is to like maximize the production of entropy. If that comes in the form of building an artificial superintelligence that like and that there's some non-biological way of maximizing the production of entropy, then so be it. And myself and from what I read from his writings, like people like Daniel Schmachtenberger, and what I'm hearing from you, will kind of defend the kind of sanctity of nature and the sanctity of biological life, if you like, in a way, and are hoping for some kind of awakening in or through nature in the natural world. And I think there's a really interesting piece here in like what is the sort of synthesis position of these two, of essentially like physics and biology. There's folks that like kind of worship physics and entropy, and there's other folks, and I'm more and I admit that I'm more along this on this other side of like that kind of worship life and specifically biological life. Although, but I take the I can quite easily get into the state of mind of like, well, what really is there really anything that special about biological life and like carbon atoms as opposed to like silicon atoms and so on? But I'm curious, what is going to kind of bridge the physics and the biology here, like the entropy and the syntropy, the non-living and the living in the form of some kind of religion or spirituality.
Yeah, me too, man. That's the golden question. I think that's like, yeah, and part of me just thinks that, you know, it makes sense that people working in engineering groups surrounded by silicon and surrounded by these like slick, like I've worked in Silicon Valley a long time ago, briefly, and it is like another world. It's like a kind of like, you know, that you're in these kind of like air conditioned sort of like zones, and everything's like, it's like, you know, a campus basically. It's like a kind of like sealed off from the rest of the natural world, certainly. And then dealing all day with the machine. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fascinating as well. I think some kind of convergence and synthesis of those two positions is what I would like to see.
And I guess the obvious thing that comes to mind is just the more of us spending time in each other's worlds, like, and there is definitely a sense in which like it's actually, I could be cynical about it, but I guess mostly I'm quite encouraged that Sam Altman is drinking ayahuasca. I would rather he is than he isn't. And similarly, like those of us who have been like kind of more embedded in kind of plant medicine world and kind of like, you know, paganism and druidism and kind of like, you know, earth-based spirituality in various forms, probably could do our bit by becoming really familiar and respectful of the kind of transhumanist and like accelerationist perspective. And I know that in the past you've written a lot about just the importance of quality dialogue across tribes. So that sort of seems to apply here as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. And I think even, you know, I'm wrestling with this myself as well, because I feel this like jerk aversion to this sort of transhumanist position, but I'm trying to hold, this is the early phases I often find, like of the trigger and then the aversion, and then the sort of trying to loosen that and be like, okay, well, where's the synthesis of it? But the trigger is full of good information as well, because it's for me, I've been like, okay, why am I so activated by it? And then how's that clouding my sense making around it, you know? But I also don't like, I'm also not want to go fully druidic pagan either. I don't really, that position doesn't really do it for me. So it's a tricky one. Yeah, nice. But it's cool.
And actually, so back in the first session of this course, we shared this article, 5 Things That Make You Metamodern. The first of which was this awareness of allergies, like, you know, becoming aware of our triggers. So interesting that we've like come all the way back around to that in a way. Okay, that's all, folks. Yeah, that's the end of the Technological Metamodernism course. Thank you so much, Ali, for joining us this week. That was a fascinating discussion. I'm sure people got tons out of that. I'm really looking forward to this book. It sounds like it's very relevant to lots of what we've been discussing. Thanks. Just a couple of practical pieces. You'll get a feedback form tomorrow morning. I would really, really appreciate your feedback. The more honest and detailed, the better. I'm also very interested in turning the course notes now into a book, and I've never written a book before, unlike Ali. So if you can give me any advice on that, or point me in the right direction, maybe Ali can, I don't know. Then I'd be grateful for that. As I mentioned, there'll be in-person Futurecraft gatherings in February in France and in Cornwall in the UK in May. So they'll be on the Telegram group and on the Futurecraft Substack before long. Thank you so much for your participation, and hopefully see you for the next course, or at one of those in-person gatherings.
Bye everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Did I see in the chat that there's Chris is hosting a conversation?
Yep.
So
please join us.
You posted a Zoom link. Hopefully some people pick that up.
Yep.
I'll leave you guys to it. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.